Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Meru Media podcast. This is Mukunda Raghavan today with a unique series that we're starting actually called the Meru Manthan, which is basically means the churning of Meru, which is our podcast. And I thought it was actually very interesting today, or very auspicious in some sense, to have the first of our series be inaugurated with a conversation with Judaism, which is the founder or the origin of most of Western Semitic faiths. So it's actually a great way to start a dialogue. And today we have Rabbi Professor Alan Brill, who has written this fantastic book called Rabbi on the Ganges. So you can check that out right there, in which he discusses and his experience in India, and also about the Jewish-Hindu differences, similarities, and their kind of churning together. So, Rabbi, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, so before we kick off anything, I kind of would love to get your background and how you first, like where you were born, and how you became a rabbi, and how your journey was to get there.
So I was born in Queens, New York.
Yeah.
Native New Yorker. Parents were born in Poland.
Okay.
Deep Eastern European roots. Grew up and was interested in philosophy and religion.
Okay.
Became a rabbi at Yeshiva University, an Orthodox rabbinical seminary, after having gone there for college. After ordination, I then went on for a doctorate in mysticism at Fordham.
Interesting. Okay.
That was really the angle here.
Yeah.
And was a professor of mysticism for more than a decade.
Okay.
Then at some point in the 21st century turned into an interfaith activity.
Yeah. So can I ask a few questions to sparse out your what you explained in your history? So growing up in Queens, I mean, I lived in New York for 5 years myself. I worked in Brooklyn mostly as a prosecutor way back in like 15 years ago. But growing up in Queens, was your family pretty religious, or were you guys more of like the secular Jewish community at the time?
Neither. They were first generation. They were immigrants, so they were traditional.
Right. Okay.
They were neither secular nor a denomination. They were traditional the way many people, immigrants are. You're still keeping to the traditions, but you're not plugged into any specific definitions. You're more concerned with the town you came from. Okay.
And so growing up, were you yourself religiously oriented, or were you kind of just a traditional person? And at that point, what drew you to kind of want to learn more about Judaism and get into?
So it was a mixture of both. Many years partly raised traditional, partly the reaction and rejection of the traditionalism, and therefore becoming Orthodox, which is a way that's less traditional and more formal.
Okay.
20th century.
Okay, so I think I think a lot of my listeners probably do not have a very great grasp of Judaism. So now, I mean, we're throwing around terms like Orthodox, traditional, secular. Would it be possible for you to kind of explain what that means? Yeah.
So a traditionalist is you're still keeping festivals, dietary laws, because you did it in the old country.
Uh-huh.
You're not particularly plugged into any specific definition, philosophy book, but here are the recipes you did and the eating style and the festivals.
Okay.
As a traditionalist. Then American Jewish denominations range from a majority of America being secular at this point, to the 19th century break between Orthodoxy and Reform, in which Reform Jews say you don't have to keep the ritual laws anymore, or none of the dietary laws, but we can now do a much more abstract, ethical, philosophic religion.
Okay.
Versus Orthodoxy that said the ritual laws, the dietary laws are still in effect.
I see. So it was primarily a break upon the dietary laws and the traditional kind of festivals, not festivals, or rituals.
Sabbath laws, festival laws. I mean,
Okay.
do you still keep the details or not?
Okay. Okay, interesting. And then there was, and then now we have the secular Jewish movement, which is much more you keep the festivals, but not necessarily any of the rituals necessarily.
That's right.
Okay. So growing up in kind of like rejecting one and kind of going towards the other, how was your community at that time? Did you find a good amount of resources? I'm guessing this is probably in the 50s and 60s, right? In which
60s and 70s.
60s and 70s. Okay. Yeah, 60s and 70s, where you would find that churn in New York City between the various communities of the Jewish people. So
in New York, there was quite a bit of resources.
Okay. So now, what kind of drove you towards the yeshiva school?
Originally, because it had great success rate of getting almost everyone into medical school.
So you want to be a doctor at that time?
I don't know if I did, but it had incredible success rate for graduate school back in the 70s. It had ability to take immigrant kids and turn them into American professionals.
It's interesting because it's like a very similar way that Indian immigrants view how their children should be going. Whatever school gets you to medical school or engineering school, go that way.
Right, but the overall package had that ability to accomplish that.
Okay. So you got into yeshiva, and then what there kind of pulled you towards the Judaic traditions?
Well, because it's a Jewish school. It's an Orthodox Jewish college in New York. So then you become part of it. You become part of the community. You redefine yourself in much more theoretical and book knowledge terms.
Okay. And is this when you learned Hebrew, or did you learn Hebrew younger?
I learned it younger. Elementary school.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you had a long period of time in which it
was like a liturgical Hebrew.
Okay, as opposed to the textual.
Fluent, as opposed to fluent. It's like the difference between somebody who knows the occasional chanting in Sanskrit versus somebody who actually read the books.
Right. Okay. I understand. That's a very good demarcation there. And then so you went through your education yeshiva, and then you decided to become a rabbi. What was the impetus for you to go become a rabbi at that point?
So at that point, there was a very famous Jewish teacher, rabbi by the name of Joseph Dov Soloveitchik. Okay, who is in now the books on philosophy, and you can go, quickly find out who he was. But he was an important teacher. And I said, regardless of what I'm going to do in graduate school, I'm going to stay and study with him for rabbinical ordination. Okay. So it's his presence.
It's his presence that kind of drove you towards being a rabbi. I mean, did you have an inclination before that you wanted to pursue that path, or was it kind of?
There was an inclination, but it was what not worked out.
Okay, so you pursued your you became ordained as a rabbi, and then you decided, you know what, I'm not educated enough. I'm gonna go get a PhD at this point.
That's
right. and you focused. You said mysticism, but what exactly was the PhD in?
The PhD was on the 19th century mysticism of a specific Hasidic thinker.
Okay. And I think that's the thinker you mentioned quite a bit in the book.
A thinker called Rabbi Tzedek Cohen of Lublin.
Okay.
I don't mention him once.
Okay. Interesting.
What?
That's interesting. You did your PhD on him, but like the reference.
He only comes up once in the page on Kashmir Shaivism.
Interesting.
But it's an esoteric doctrine. It's the sort of thing you do PhDs in.
That's excellent. Okay, so you got your PhD and then you went and teach. And during this period, I imagine you also studied quite a bit of the Kabbalah you keep referring to.
Yes, I'm Professor of Kabbalah.
Okay, that's how you said Kabbalah. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so can you explain what Kabbalah is?
Sure. The original term meant those received traditions from antiquity dealing with esoteric topics, cosmology, angels, God, a lot of things you would know as Vedanta, a lot of things you would know as various emanation schemes,
Okay.
things you would know as schemes of how the divine comes down into the world.
Uh-huh.
And that's what it originally meant.
And how old's the tradition itself?
Antiquity.
I mean, so we don't have like a starting date that people
No,
can.
we went out started. We usually start the books that we use come from about the 13th century.
Okay.
Okay, because that's the point that it stopped using the science of antiquity and started using the science and philosophy of the Middle Ages.
Okay.
So it almost remade itself.
Interesting. And so, and this is post Maimonides, obviously, right? So was I'm guessing the influence of Maimonides.
Maimonides, the philosophers, the thinkers of the Middle Ages, the astronomers, the scientists influenced the way we read the ancient traditions. We no longer read them in Bronze Age, Iron Age type interpretations. We now read them as post-medieval rational interpretations.
So you're saying the 13th century, but there was probably a large period of time before that was just the oral tradition, right?
Oral traditions, fragments, hundreds of little books.
Wow. I mean, just to consider the scope of how all that was maintained, despite the fact that the Jewish people didn't really have a specific place to maintain these on their own, is astounding.
Yeah. I mean, that's the very big difference between Judaism and, let's say, Hinduism.
Right.
Because when I was jumping ahead, when I was in Banaras and all the university professors are basically telling me their families had been in this spot for 1,000 years, showing me their family estates, which Jews can't do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a testament to how deeply how powerful the tradition and the connection to that tradition has been for, I mean, in the better part of it, for 3,000 years, where people have been moving from place to place, been separated, and I mean, at least like you explained, even in Banaras, you might go to a place that has books there sitting there for maybe 500,000 years, whatever it was. But where are you going to get that in the Jewish community? It's so difficult, right?
That's right.
So I mean, it's fascinating. And in the same time, it's sad that people had to go through that much turmoil to find a place now. But I mean, we'll get into that a little bit later. So now you given us background on the Kabbalic studies and your own background. What kind of pushed you to go to India, of all places, to do anything?
Well, there's a background here, pre-India. So Interfaith on some level got started in the 1960s when the Catholics and Protestants realized they can't continue to mistreat Jews.
Yeah.
And they also then, on some level, on a back burner, also started reaching out to Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists.
Right.
Through Nostra Aetate and other documents.
Right.
And that was era one of Interfaith.
Okay.
Era two came after 9/11.
Okay.
When most official bodies realized we can't write religion out of the equation anymore.
Right.
So major journals like The Economist from England, which was declared secularist, actually put out a book called God is Back. And basically saying you can't understand any of the disputes going on all over the world in the 21st century without religion. It's not secular. Sense. It's no longer secularist versus secularist. We've got to rewrite our thinking.
Yeah.
So there was a huge amount of now this new second generation of interfaith for the 21st century. And in that, I shifted from doing mysticism, Kabbalah, more the internal stuff. But since I had done that, I had enough of a language to now be able to speak to Catholics, Muslims, Hindus. So there's a huge amount of which people wanted speakers who could address religious issues.
Sure.
And be able to understand the other side. It's hard to think that in 2001, 2, 3, people had just never thought about these things. It was always a secular group versus a secular group.
Right. I mean, I think it's a strong point you made, because so much of the same fights that we're fighting today in secular world are due to concepts of like, for example, predestination. Are you your genes, or is there free will? I mean, all these are religious or philosophical ideas. Yeah.
So that was the new age of interfaith.
Yeah.
I went to all these interfaith events.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I teach now in a Catholic university.
Okay.
And that's the one that's closest at home. But at some level, when I had a sabbatical, it was, since I said the real dialogue from a Jewish point of view is really with the Hindu religions.
And why'd you think that?
Because there's a certain ritual way of thinking, a certain philosophic way of thinking, a certain way of how the tradition works.
Right.
I wanted to bring out.
Interesting.
Or to put it in the other way, both Judaism and Hinduism have strong Bronze, Iron Age, antiquity roots.
Yeah.
Dealing with sacrifice, dealing with purity laws, that regardless of how they've changed over the millennium, still give a very tight, hyper-ritual structure to both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to bring that out. So my original intention was to actually spend my time looking at the hyper-ritualism of both.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, as I say in my introduction, I came back having to answer so many questions for people on the basics of, what I saw as Hinduism and what I saw the similarities, that it turned into a very different book.
Interesting, because I mean, so this started probably for you like 2003 in terms of thinking about this, or 2004?
No, this actually started. This actually started about 9 or 10 or so.
And that's when you started like kind of looking into Hinduism and trying to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, beyond the obvious.
Right. So I mean, it is. So you started about like 10 years ago to kind of explore the Hinduism space. Now, your work previously with the interfaith world until 2009, did you have an understanding about like the concepts in Hindu thought, like, Meru Manthan, things like that?
I had the concept the way you would do it from a textbook, Introduction to Indian Philosophies.
Right. Okay.
So I had all those classic textbooks that had all the darshana, had the philosophies, but there's a very difference between, the same way you have a textbook of here are linguistic philosophies, here are epistemologies, here are Indian philosophies.
Right.
Very, very different now, actually working through the connections and similarities beyond the textbook concerns.
So when you started the process, was the milieu of the Indian thought difficult to kind of engage with, or did you find it very easy for yourself? So
coming from Kabbalah, I found it very easy.
Okay.
That was the undercurrent that was always there, that had been noticed since the night. In 2012, I put out a book called Judaism and World Religions.
Uh-huh.
I already had a chapter surveying what had been said in the past on the relationship of Judaism and Hinduism, Judaism and Buddhism, etc., Judaism, Confucianism. And already from the 19th century, as soon as the sacred books of the East got published, Jews wrote positive reviews and said, this sounds more Jewish than any other series. Meaning there were all these little obscure French and German Jewish reviewers who said, I understand this. So I think that's I was coming with that sort of a background.
Okay. So, I mean, now I'm guessing there'll be a point where your textual study, and then when you go to India to engage with the groups there, I mean, maybe this is a question for later, but I'll just pose it anyway. Did you find that your definitions of terms changed for you as you thought about them when you first read the text as opposed to when you engage with them later on?
It's not a question of change. Mm-hmm. There's a certain knowledge you have when you can just answer a line because you can memorize it, and the understanding from the inside. So, as soon as I'm off the plane, there's a calendar, and I know that I was landing like the day before Durga Puja, Navarati. I was landing the day before. But as soon as I land in the airport, you pick up a newspaper, and here's their woman's discount at the gym. Sign up, or to say that here we're now going to have a take back the night rally at the university. You understand the complexity of it is very different.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's funny that you bring that up because I would have never even thought about it that way, right? Like, I wouldn't have thought linking like Durga Puja Navratri to sudden women's discount for this, and maybe it's because I'm a man and it doesn't pass my mind, but it's clearly there's that link.
Yeah, I mean, there becomes that link. It becomes the immediate. The immediate, I walk out and there's, the restaurants are saying there's going to be no eggs during this week or whatever. So it's not textbook. It becomes very real.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I was part of the faculty at Banaras Hindu University.
Okay.
I should give the backtrack here. I spent a sabbatical. I had a Fulbright, and I taught at Banaras Hindu University.
For how long?
For 6 months.
Okay.
And so being part of it, I was getting to sit with the philosophy and religion faculty. Mm-hmm. So I got to hear them inside how they talk about it in ways that are very different.
Right.
Because they're insiders.
Right.
They claim, they have ancestors that were teaching whatever is for 1,000 years already.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I got to teach Judaism to a class of Hindus and Buddhists at the university who gave me continuous feedback on what this sounds like and doesn't sound like. Interesting.
So what kind of drove you to go to India at that point?
So therefore, it was if you're going to learn, I wanted to go, where should I go? I'll go to Banaras.
Yeah. What's the... So, I mean, from 2012, when you finished...
I was 2013, 14, I was in India, but the application had to be done by 2012.
Okay, so you had just finished your last book, which is Judaism, World Religions, right. and then you were like, I want to go to India to learn more about Hinduism and Buddhism, and you went...
No, not Buddhism.
Just Hinduism.
Very different than Judaism.
Yeah. Oh, so I mean, in some sense, they are different. They have very similar rituals. It's right. I mean, when you get to the nitty gritty, they tend to have a very similar liturgical kind of approach. Right. But yeah, so you go to India in 2013, and you spend 6 months, or do you spend longer traveling more than that?
I was stationed there. Because of the rules, you have to be stationed there, and as a foreigner, I had to be registered with that foreign office.
Right.
But then I traveled around to Hardwar, Rishikesh, Chennai, Kanchipuram, Mahabalipuram. I mean, I traveled around.
I mean, did you do that during your the 6 months you were there, or did you take time extra to travel? No, it was
part of the 6 months.
Okay, so you spent about 6 months total in India at that period.
Because you're off for festival weeks.
Oh, right. That's right. That's true.
It's not an American semester.
No, that's right. Yeah. I went to school there for a year in college and education abroad, and there's a lot of vacation time. But so when you got there, what was the, I guess, and we'll get into the heart of the book, but what really stood out to you about Hindu thought that connected you deeply with Jewish thought when you first got there?
when I first got there was knowing how the darshana worked from the inside,
Okay.
because here we have the Nyaya scholasticism working almost identical to the medieval Jewish thinkers.
Right.
Because the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the entire rubric.
Right.
And in fact, when you realize that Jewish medieval thinkers are even quoting the Brahma.
Really?
Yeah. Sa'adi Gaon quotes, he's quoting, here's this Christian view, the Islamic view, here's the Brahmin view.
Wow, interesting.
You realize that there's an exchange going on in the Middle Ages.
Right.
So immediately, from my Jewish philosophic background, becomes an immediate plug-in.
Uh-huh.
And the other one was the Mamamsa, the legal thinking, which is very, very similar to Talmudic halachic thinking.
Yeah. I mean, did you get any opportunity to see how they think about, like, because a lot of Mamamsa is linked to your theory of language, right? About what what constitutes a sentence, and then how the sentence should be viewed. Is it very similar that way to Talmudic thinking?
It's very similar to that. I mean, the person who actually wrote the invitation for me to come was a professor of language.
Uh-huh.
So I learned more from the sort of faculty room jokes. Is the professor of Mamamsa, when everyone's talking about some form of God or the ultimate.
Right.
He's going, if there is such a thing.
That's so funny.
The most ritually strict faculty member who's out there in the Ganga every morning is like.
Yeah. But is that something a Jewish rabbi would say?
Yes. So it was those things which were even, go beyond anything you could find in a textbook or in the library. And
which is fascinating, right? Because like you just explained, it's a rabbi is probably very liturgically and ritualistic oriented. Mimamsa, like, everything is exactly that way too. Every ritual has to be followed in a certain way. You have to do all these things, and then you ask them if they believe in God. They're like, it doesn't matter, because, like, in the Mimamsa sense, it's not God that provides the thing. It's like this universe that the Vedas are linked to, right, that provides.
So that's what changed in the book from, let's say, my doing formal columns of, like, let's compare ritual thinking one to the other, to a much more informal, like, that's a much more impressive connection for my reader.
Yeah.
About things.
That's really fascinating. So you spent time teaching Judaism. So before we get more into the similarities, let's discuss what were, like, the fundamental misconceptions or ideas that the Indians had, Hindus and Buddhists in India, about Judaism.
That the fundamental distinction is that it's the Bible.
Okay.
And that the successor is Christianity.
Okay.
There is no sense that Judaism has a rabbinic literature, Talmud, philosophy, and continued for another 2,500 years after the Bible. They think it's nothing but the Christian Old Testament, with a Christian understanding that the Old Testament is some God of vengeance and Christian is the God of love. They only know Judaism through the missionary Christians.
Right.
So they basically know. So I actually started my course dealing with what's Jewish ritual, what is a mitzvah, what is halacha. That's where I really started it. The other thing that they're misunderstanding, therefore the fundamental, is, does that mean that Jews still give sacrifices? Because Judaism's Leviticus.
Right.
And then I would say, no. Oh, and they would say, I guess, your 19th century reformers got rid of it also. Without a clear sense that Judaism, from the destruction of the temple in the year 70, already switched over to equivalence in saying words of your mouth in prayer and chant is a sacrifice. Your table and the table setup is sacrifice. Your ritual is that. And that becomes where the interesting comparison comes in.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like something a lot of people don't even know. Like, sacrifice no longer allowed amongst the Jewish people because there's no temple, and
Right.
sacrifice has to be done within the confines of the temple to the holiest of the holies, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so it's just interesting that I mean, there's so many misconceptions, like you explained, like connected to Christianity or Islam. So what would you say is the core of maybe, I mean, I guess Talmudic Judaism and the core of Judaism as a whole, in terms of, if you can have a core. I mean, again, these
The
are
core is that the idea that there are 613 commandments.
uh-huh.
You keep the commandments. They are a way of life.
Okay.
They're explained through the halacha, the Jewish legal thinking, like the Mamamsa.
Yeah.
There's a whole system of how it plays itself out. And the Jewish life is about that sort of life and connecting to God and the cosmos and family. And that's the way I presented Judaism. Or, in other words, Judaism is about keeping kosher, keeping the Sabbath, keeping purity laws, keeping wedding laws, festival laws, and it's not part of this whole Christian drama of saved, conversion, or any of those.
Sure. So would you say that Judaism, isn't a doctrinal belief system? It is more of a way of life, like they would call, what they used to call Hinduism, for a while. It's more of a way of life than it is a belief system.
It's more of a way of life, just like they used to say about Hinduism. But that doesn't mean there's beliefs, but there's no confessional or doctrinal that you have to check off and say, I have to believe this or else.
Right. So, like, if, for example, if a Jewish person believed that God was a man versus God was formless, there would be no issue. No one would care.
Right.
Okay.
Unless you're a group that's firmly committed to that, to one of those sides of the other.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And what other, like, and so how did you deal with, the misconceptions that played with the Hindu and Buddhist students? Like, aside from explaining to them, were you able to show them how the misconceptions, like, can be addressed?
They were not that sort. I just addressed it head on. The classroom was not. They didn't need it addressed.
Okay.
I was just so weird and so foreign. Here people come to teach, Buddhist meditation, and they're foreign. I was so foreign by that. They were just listening.
Wow. And so how did they respond to?
They were very positive. The professor who usually teaches Western religions actually sat in on the course and took copious notes. But a lot of it was also just explaining it to everybody else and everywhere I went. And
Right. Okay, so let's get into a few of the. I have a couple questions here. So how does the Jewish version of, let's say, God, and maybe you could break down both the Talmudic and then the rational, and maybe the Kabbalah idea, play similarity or difference with the Hindu notion?
Well, for one thing, I would not say notion. I would deal with notions.
Yeah. Okay.
So
conceptions.
Rabbinic literature. There's a part called Midrash, which is like a rewritten Bible. And that's the God there is very much like the Puranic God, meaning it's in all sorts of ways of stories and actions and getting involved in this world. Unlike the God in the medieval Jewish philosophers, which tended to be much more niyaya, abstract, known through arguments, first cause.
Right.
Which is very different than the mystical oneness Kabbalistic views, which is very different than the Kabbalistic views that divide God into male, female, father, mother.
Okay.
So, for example, Christianity and Islam do not have a male and female in the God.
Right.
Jews do. Jews don't have mother and father. I mean, the whole relationships
Yeah, because in the book you also mentioned Asherah, right? Is that how you say it? Asherah, and that's considered like it's both a tree and
in the Bible. That was always the constant thing, is that there was always this female consort in the ancient Near East.
Right.
But in medieval Kabbalah, you have the Shekhinah, the feminine of the divine.
Interesting.
Which plays it out and is seen as the energy for certain systems, seen as the energy of the system, like Shakti.
Right, or Prakriti, right? Like you'll be Purusha Prakriti.
So in that sense, that's a very different view than the one of the philosophers.
Right.
And then you come to the modern era, both Jews and Hindus are creating late 19th, early 20th century views to deal with British and German philosophy that you don't feel left behind. So you reformulate things as idealisms and...
Yeah, I mean, to touch on this last point, there are two scholars. I don't know if you ever had a chance, Joydeep Bagchi and Vishwa Adaluri, that wrote this book about Indology in the 19th century.
Yeah.
How they take basically their exact concept of Jewish people and apply it to Hindu thinkers or their entire texts, right? Like it's a fascinating way of how you view how first the Christians or Protestants particularly viewed the Jewish people and then connected them to the Brahmins.
Right. So in some way, I agree.
Yeah.
In the sense without their Protestant, arrogant, pejorative toward the two to Hinduism and Judaism. In the fact, yes, if you look at both of them, they are ritualistic.
Yeah.
What counts is going through the ritual life. Did you go through festival or not? It's not about belief in salvation, which for the Protestant point of view means they're inferior religions. Right. But Jews and Hindus can very much understand what it's about. So
do Kabbalist practitioners also maintain the ritual and liturgical, I don't want to say purity, but the conformity?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, they do too. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's very similar to like any of the Vedanta schools, like that would have their philosophical position, mystic position, but also have their functionally liturgical, ritualistic nature too.
That's right.
Okay, so now you spent some time actually going through, I think actually in one of the chapters going through the vyuhas, the 5 vyuhas of in Pancharatra doctrine, and you kind of compare it to the Kabbalistic kind of interpretation, actually the Jewish version of I think you said 4 of them they would be okay with, or 3 of them they'd be okay with, and then 2 of them wouldn't. So can we kind of go through the 5 of them and kind of discuss them? Because I mean, for my listeners, the 5 in Pancharatra, which is an agamic tradition connected to Mahabharata in the Narayaniya section of the Shanti Parva, they connects it to basically Vishnu. Narayana says he has 5 forms, 5 vyuhas. There is Para, there's which is his ultimate form. There is Avatara, Arka, Antaryami, and then the last one would be the Vyuha form. So there's the ultimate, and then
let me do the Jewish system, and then I'll plug it in just for your.
That's perfect.
So in the Jewish system, the highest is the unknown divine, the infinite, the absolute, and different systems will emphasize whether it's a more positive infinite, a negative infinite.
Yeah.
Then you have the first emanation, which is then the divine mind personified as Keter, as crown, which is seen as God's ultimate mercy and ultimate flowing into the universe. And then the first coming down to be would be Chachma and Bina, divine wisdom and understanding, male and female. From then you have the 7 lower sphirot, 7 lower elms, which could then be personified as husband and wife, groom and bride. From there, it then comes down into the human being and into the world.
Okay. Yeah.
So the one that Judaism doesn't have is in objects.
Yeah.
It's in the world as a whole,
Yeah.
The Jews will never use representation and never have an avatar in an object.
Right.
That's a representation.
Right.
That's the real divide, even if the theory is the same.
Right. So you would not have the avatar or the anka, right? Those two forms.
So from the Jewish point, from the plugging it in, you have, depending on which system you want to use, Narayan Ein Sof, the highest level.
Yeah.
Then you have a coming to be of whatever system you specifically have. Shiva, Lakshmi, the first coming to be of Ishwara and presentation of the world. Then you have all those levels of emanation of the qualities.
Yeah.
Judaism treats Sfirot as qualities the same way.
Yeah.
Then the next level would be the manifestation within human beings.
Yeah.
Or from the Jewish point of view, within the undifferentiated world as a whole. Right. Jews will never have a differentiated object.
But in that context, I mean, as long as the ark was there, that was considered.
Yes, so that's what I bring out in the book, that as much as Jews say no, ark in the tabernacle, the Hebrew language, the actual Torah scroll, take on those same
qualities.
And
you actually point out something really interesting in your book too, which I hadn't really conceived of and thought about is, I mean, I've known as a fact that Jews have been in India for a couple thousand years, right? Or maybe around that time period. But you show their rituals in some sense of them even taking the Torah and putting it up like on a mandala and kind of doing not worship necessarily to it, but venerating it in a similar way as Hindu would venerate a pratima or a murti.
Well, the one I like showing to my classroom is when Jews light Shabbat candles every week.
Yeah.
They light candles to start the Shabbat. And in India, the Indian Jews treat it as an arti with the same hand motions, with putting bananas and fruit. Candles. Meaning the whole function of how candles work is a very indigenous Indian way of doing it, even though it's still the same Shabbat candles of the Talmud.
Well, it's really fascinating. So, like, how would you end up viewing that in terms of the of whether that's allowed or not, or is that?
So I end the book with that question: if most Jews, instead of having lived in Poland and Russia, lived in Morocco and Tunisia, if most Jews had actually moved to India, that would have been normal, and Jews acting like Europeans would have been the strange thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I mean, it appears to me there's people think in some sense like Judaism is a very rigid kind of tradition, and I don't want to use faith because, like we discussed, I don't think that makes sense. The tradition, but it appears actually that as the tradition moves to different places, there's so much flexibility for assimilation within a certain confine and the ability to express one's own tradition culture within the confines of the larger Jewish.
That's right. So from my point of view, it's if Jews are wandering people, if more of them had wandered to India, it would have had a very different flavor to it.
So I don't know. I mean, so I'm guessing when you went down to, is this the community? You saw the Jewish people in Bombay, right? Did you go down to Kerala
and Mumbai and
Because from my understanding, the law of return has kind of caused an exodus of sorts from these regions back to Israel.
It's more complex.
Okay.
Is during the India-Pakistan breakup wars.
Jews
tend not to do well when those wars occur. So a lot of them just left seeking, and they went to Israel. But it was in some way. This was one of the cases that maybe they shouldn't have. They'd been for 3,000 years very peacefully in India.
Yeah, I mean, do you know if there was any incidences of oppression or ill treatment? I mean, to your knowledge, in the Indian subcontinent?
No.
Okay.
So it's a community that should have never really left.
But here is actually another. I mean, you very briefly broach this in your book, but I think it's important to discuss. So swastika, right? So how does, I mean, with this terrible, Holocaust that occurred in the 1930s and 40s in Europe, and its connection to the German Iron Cross swastika, how does that affect you as you went to India to see it everywhere?
Yeah. So I mean, when I first arrived as part of Fulbright, you've got to rent your own apartment. I almost rented an apartment in Swastika Towers, which is the name of an apartment complex.
Yeah.
In Lanka and Varanasi. But the truth is, I've been working with Buddhists and Hindus here back in America on that issue, and going to panels at the World Parliament of Religions.
Yeah.
As the Jewish representative, is the swastika actually exists in ancient Israel also.
It did.
It's called a double meander in Greco-Roman terms.
Okay.
And so a lot of the ancient designs of synagogues and mosaics actually have the double meander, the swastik.
Interesting.
Okay, and it continues up through the Middle Ages. It was not a problematic sign. It was a very normal Greco-Roman Indian symbol. No different than the six-pointed, what's now called Star of David and Jewish Star, which was just as much an Indian symbol also.
Yeah, a Sri Chakra.
Yeah. So there are now some dharmic activists here in New York, New Jersey, who are working to reclaim the swastika.
Yeah.
Who are trying to figure out what to do, because they've even gone back that the Nazis themselves didn't even call it a swastika. They called it a hook cross.
Hook cross, yeah.
And they actually it's only the later translations where it became a swastika rather than a hook cross.
Wow.
And there's a different image. And can we shed enough difference? And they're working hard. So they're usually going to get a Hindu, Buddhist, Jain panel, and then one or two Jews to talk about the pain for the older generation of seeing that sign.
Right.
But at the same time, the acknowledgement that it's everywhere in Asian countries.
Yeah.
In some way that enough distance to come to be in order to bring it back comfortably.
Yeah, because I mean, I can imagine how difficult and jarring it could be. Just, I mean, even in the U.S., right? I mean, we both live here. To see a swastika thrown up on a wall, graffiti is such a scaring, daunting image for not, I mean, mostly for Jewish people, but it also affects a lot of us because it's connected to white power, white supremacy. Right. But then you go to a Hindu temple, which might be like a couple blocks down the street from that graffiti, and you'll see the same swastika, as you enter into the temple. And I can imagine that can be a little like head bobbling.
Right. It's head bobbling. Once you've been in India, you lose the fear because they're different. They're angled differently. The dots in it, the shape.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's an interesting conversation I've had with a lot of my Jewish friends too, who react. They're like, "Oh, that symbol offends me," and I'm like, "But it also at the same point for us, it means something else. It means may good tidings come. It's a different idea. So so whenever they come around, I tend to like either try to put it away or explain it, and you know.
I mean, the truth is, a whole bunch of New York City subway stations in which that's the decoration.
Yeah.
And people don't even notice it.
Really? I didn't know that. I don't remember this.
It's the old tile, the fancy old tiled subway stations. Several of them used.
Oh wow! Okay.
Swastika. I mean, that's the point: is how recent this issue is, and how long will it take before people are able to move on.
Right, and then so you also mentioned the Star of David, which is very similar to the Sri Chakra. So what does the Star of David mean in Judaism, is it just a symbol, or is it more of it has a representation in
No, in
Kabbalah?
Judaism, it's only a symbol.
Okay, so it has no because I know that Judaism also has mystic symbols in Kabbalah. Is there any?
It's not one of the old ones.
Okay, so is there any area where mystic symbols in Kabbalah connect to mystic symbols in the Indian tradition?
Yeah, the more mandala ones.
Okay.
The more circular ones, in which are now the Sri chakra.
Yeah.
Looks very much like Kabbalistic trees.
Okay.
Those are the commonalities.
Interesting. So also in your book, you spent some time discussing particularly Vedanta and this concept of Saguna Brahman, Nirguna Brahman,
right,
and the Jewish concepts. That's so right. How does Judaism view this particularly? This is more Shankaracharya's version of, or his conception of God as Nirguna, without qualities, kind of like just being on its own, versus the qualified deity. How is the Jewish tradition view this?
So without qualities is a great deal of commonality.
Okay.
But the question is how the qualities become where the real difference is, because here the Jewish qualities are very linked to specific images, the Torah, the divine name of God, the Sfirot, and it doesn't become as fluid of forms. It doesn't become the fluid form that it does in all the Hindu versions. Sure.
But in that context, right? Like, so you have in the Shankara tradition, it's Nirguna Brahman, somehow connected through Maya, seen through Maya as this world as everything. What is, because for the Jewish sense, the world is actually, so in this sense, is the world like only real from a perspective, or is it always real? I guess would be a question.
So for the Jewish for the philosophic tradition, the world is real. The Jewish mystical tradition, it's much more the world is all divine, and ultimately, if from God's perspective, there's nothing but God. To use the Chabad language, the world is nothing but God. From our point of view, the world is filled with God. There are those distinctions. There are distinctions between God as known through religion versus God as known through cows and trees and grass.
Right, which you spent some time on, right?
Jews have all those distinctions. The difference is Jews will then never worship the tree.
Right.
But the point is, then when you step back, and like for example, you watch them at the Western Wall.
Yeah.
I say that phenomenologically, if you leave out all the theology, it's very much as if you're getting a darshan at the Western Wall.
Yeah.
And the big difference is if this was a Hindu shrine, someone would eventually draw a face on the Western Wall. And then put some ribbons on it.
Right. That's right.
But functionally,
and there'll be flowers in front of it, and some spillock here and there.
But that's the point. But it's functionally, the same thing is going on.
So, what is the significance of the Western Wall to the Jewish people?
Well, that's the point. It's an unarticulated point, because the actual practice goes beyond the theology.
Right. No, but I mean the structure itself. What does it represent?
Okay. So the structure is the last retaining wall of Herod's rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, which is not a very strong,
right,
as a Herodian retaining wall, but in the sense that the actual temple is behind it, and more important than the temple was God's own presence.
Right.
And that there was behind that was where God really showed himself, was really a representation, where the ritual worship to God took place.
Right.
And a lot of now the greeting of the Western Wall has a great deal of, we're now going to go get a darshan of where to see God.
Wow. I mean, it's just historically that's really interesting. Just that this wall from around, I guess, like 70. No, the temple was destroyed 70.
About year zero.
Yeah. So that wall has so much significance from an even symbolic perspective, but it's kind of like you've shown it's been, I mean, I don't want to say deified, but it's been treated as a tirtha, like a place of, in the Hindu sense, a place of pilgrimage, that it has power there.
That's right. That's right. And also you have figures in the 16th, 17th century who would then get images that the Shekhinah would come to them as a personified female sitting on the wall, crying for the destroyed temple.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's just
people would go there to incubate these visions.
Right. Interesting. So now, in your book, I mean, when you also mentioned there are something like 613 commandments to follow, right? Obviously, I don't think anyone's following all 613.
That's right.
And it's very similar to like in the Dharma Shastras. There are all these rules that everyone has to live. It's like if a person were to follow the Dharma Shastra completely, every second of every day would be involved with some sort of ritual action and some sort of engagement with the world that left no time for any sort of intellectual pursuits, anything. Right. So in the 613 commandments, people aren't following most of them. I mean, do you guys have also senses of prayashchittam, which is the penance that if you don't follow something you have to do? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So how does a Jewish person, or how would a Hindu person look at a Jewish person that doesn't follow the 613? Is it not something anyone does, or is it something that people do, or how does that work?
Only about 67 that are practiced regularly.
Okay. Out of the 613. Yeah. Out of the 613.
Yeah. And the point is that becomes a real dividing point between orthodoxy and reform, whether all of them are still applicable. You say some of them, like dietary rules, should be left to earlier ages.
Interesting. It's very similar to someone that, like Orthodox Hindus, who will only wear like the cotton cloth. They wouldn't wear anything else on top of it. They have to do their morning oblations every morning, and if they don't, they have to do some other prayashchittam or some other penance to make up for it.
That's right.
As opposed to, and you can't take money for teaching. So how does Judaism view like the Purusharthas in the Hindu sense, right? The four aims of man, which is, I don't know, you don't. Go ahead.
I don't do it because I do it briefly in the fact that because in this one Judaism is lopsided,
right?
In not having the kama and the artha. Yeah. So I didn't pursue it because it's not a particularly useful point.
Because it is. I mean, is it not in the Jewish tradition that obviously sexual pleasure or sensual pleasure is there, and so
it's all there, but the formulation of it is just not enough of the similar formulation.
I see.
But there's both this worldly, and I mentioned that, but a lot of the other formulations.
Right.
Dealing with danam and giving to others and hospitality are much more common commonalities.
So how would you take the term dharma to mean in your understanding and what you think it would be the analog, if any, in the Jewish?
So dharma is the same word like Torah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a path. It's a teaching. It's a system. It could be applied to all sorts of smaller points within it.
Right. So, does that include things like swadharma, kuladharma, all that stuff? Okay. It would all fall under, right? Go ahead. You're about to say something.
I found that the much more useful term.
Dharma.
Are you on the Dharma or are you not in some form?
Right. But does Torah also mean like morality and ethics too?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can use it across that.
And European Jews will use the word mitzvah for a good deed.
Right. Okay. Mitzvah, and that's not a Jewish word. Or Hebrew.
Mitzvah means commandment, the 613 commandments.
Okay.
The European Jews will then use it for anything that seems like a good deed.
Yeah, I recognize that in Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's
Right.
a few times where they use that term. So what was your big takeaway when you spent your 6 months in India and then you came back and you saw? I mean, was this your first time? I assume.
Yeah.
It must. I mean, it's somewhat of a sensory overload, right? It is, yeah. And it's and given the fact that you're also going there for not just your visual but your intellectual like engagement, it must have been kind of contradictory. I mean, in some sense, right?
It was a very overwhelming.
Yeah.
But then, more importantly, I came back, and to get the real reality check is then I did the various Hindu temples and societies in New York and New Jersey and Philadelphia and Atlanta to actually see what people live here.
Yeah.
Because the assumption is the old country is not the way to check, because the same way you do things differently in Varanasi than you do in Bangalore.
Yeah.
Which is different than what you do here in Edison, New Jersey.
Right.
So the first is get the reality check, visit, spend time at the various New York area Hindu centers. I spoke at a mandir here in New Jersey.
Okay.
Visited around, and that was to give a sense of, now that you're an American scientist, doctor, whatever you are.
Yeah.
How are you practicing it now in New Jersey?
Interesting. And then I have a couple more questions in regards to the interaction between Hinduism and Judaism. So, in the Ten Commandments, the first one is obviously, thou shalt have. I mean, there's two versions of Ten Commandments, right? There's one in Exodus. I think there's another one in one of the other earlier books
Deuteronomy.
too.
It's Deuteronomy.
Yeah. So the first one is obviously you should not have no other god.
Okay. So let's go with that first.
Okay.
That's a Christian reading.
Okay. Then yes, please.
So that's really where the Jews and Christians differ.
Okay.
For Jews, the high point there is chapter 19 of Exodus. You will be a nation of priests. You will be Brahmin.
Okay.
You will now be lifted up to keep these laws.
Okay.
The first of the Jewish 10 Commandments is, I am the Lord who took you out from Egypt on eagle's wings. Meaning for Jews, the first commandment is the relationship between the Jewish people and God. The Christians don't count that as a commandment.
Interesting.
So therefore, that already the way Jews read it is, you're a nation of priests who are that because I took you out from the land of Egypt. And so therefore, for Jews, the second command is, you shall worship no other gods, only applies to you, the Jews. The other people follow the law in Malachi, later book in the Bible, wherever anybody calls my name under the sun, I am there.
Yeah.
I mean, God has many names in the book of Malachi. It's only the Christian reading that assumes that's the first of the 10 Commandments, that it's Christianity. You have to be a Christian, and no other religion is true.
Wow. So let me ask you, is this your interpretation of what the Jewish says?
No.
Or is this like historically
So historically, the first commandment for all Jews everywhere is, I am the Lord who took you out from Egypt. The first command for all Christians is, do not worship any other gods except Christ. So,
I mean, context here is king. Context is king. Because, the way you've explained it, it's a world of a difference from saying, okay, because I took you out and you have a relationship with me, you should not worship anyone else. Right. And you are my priest. Right. That's a different story than saying everyone else is wrong, you have to worship me. That's a very different understanding.
Right. So that's one of the biggest differences at that point.
Wow.
The Jewish commentaries will then give you commentaries
on that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
For the Jews, you don't worship any other forms of God or representatives, but that says nothing about, for like the school of Nachmanides, the medieval commentary, it says nothing about the rest of the world.
So how did the Jewish tradition viewed historically other gods or religions? Do they
So, to give you a clear point of looking at it, during the age of exploration, 17th century, when you had all these Christian books coming back from Asia, saying the Asians are all superstitious barbarians, idolaters, and we've got to bring them Christianity. When that was brought to Rabbi Menashe ben Israel, who was rabbi of the Amsterdam community in the age of the East India Company, his answer was no. Malachi, in any place they call on God in any name, they're calling on me.
I mean, it's very.
He differed with all these missionaries and their accounts of what's going on.
Yeah, it's very similar to what Krishna says in the Gita. All people worship these deities, but in fact they do not know they're worshiping me, and I am the one that provides them the answer to their prayers or whatever it is.
That's right.
I mean, that's a fascinating position. I mean, I was, again, this is partially, I know it is my fault. I grew up in I went to Catholic school, so I learned a very Christian version of what the Old Testament was. I mean, let's not even call it the Old Testament. What the Torah was, as opposed to what the Jewish people themselves
you actually learn the Old Testament because the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament are in a different order, a different arrangement, a different translation.
Right.
There's overlap, but they're not the same book.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I don't even think the Book of Maccabees, right?
It's not in the Hebrew Bible.
It's not in the Hebrew. It's in the Catholic Bible,
right.
Which is. So, I mean, what would be the major differences between the Christian or Protestant Bible? I mean, they're both different Bibles from the Jewish Bible.
Between the Jewish and the Christian?
Yeah.
So the arrangement is that, for example, the Christian Bible is arranged to point toward Christ.
Okay.
And the last book in the Bible is Malachi, when Elijah's pointing out that Jesus is coming.
Okay.
And the Jewish Bible ends with the book of Chronicles. You're going to go back to that former glory of David and Solomon.
So, I mean, was this, so by the time the
other end that I have to put in is not the arrangement different, is Jews don't have a fall of man needing a salvation or a redemption.
Okay, so how would they interpret the story of Adam in the Jewish tradition?
So it depends which. In the rabbinic tradition, which I said is like the Puranas.
Yeah.
There's a big cosmic Adam who is now the first created being, who is now the center of where the temple was.
Yeah. Very similar to Manu in that sense.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. It's not about a story of a fall.
Okay. And then how would the philosophical position and the Kabbalah view it?
The philosophic position, Adam, is about our fall from knowledge into ignorance.
Okay.
And our goal is to now get ourselves back, to redeem ourselves back to true knowledge.
It's just very Vedantic.
It's just because like that Christian overlay of the fall and needing a redemption,
right?
Their reading of Exodus, that you can't do it without their religion, is very much their take.
Right. And how would the Kabbalistic view of Adam? Would it be similar?
So no, Adam actually is an idea of a primordial Adam who is really created as his first emanation.
Okay, right. So would you say? I mean, and here's the question, because I mean, I have a decent background in ancient Greek and Neoplatonism. So was the Kabbalah ideas influenced by Neoplatonism? I mean,
at some. Okay, so there's a very complex issue because the world of Middle Platonism, was almost all Judaic.
Right. Because this is
Philo, Numenicus, Ammonicus are all Judaic.
Right.
And it's only later that the Neoplatonists are then Greco-Roman.
I see. Okay.
So where the lines go and where these traditions go is everybody's got a little bit of everybody.
Interesting, right? I mean, that's fascinating. It's how much interplay there was at
the Talmud already has Adam was originally androgynous, having both male and female, and had to be split.
That's fascinating. I mean, see, these are things.
That's why God has to be male and female for Jews.
And which is why then when it makes sense that taking, like, if Adam was male and female initially, taking the rib out would be like kind of separating the male and female into two. I mean, it's very similar to what in the Puranic story where Brahma creates the first man and women half out of himself, half,
That's right.
So I mean, these parallels pop up all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think there was kind of, I mean, for example, like the flood myth, which is very similar, and you talk about it in your book too, which is, I mean, this goes back to the time of the...
Nobody's accounted why everybody's got the flood myth.
I mean, I think some people argue that it came originally from the Sumerians or the Babylonian, not the Babylonians, but the Sumerians at the time, and
I could say it could have come from anybody, but the point is, until you're speculating that there must have been some midpoint that with it, but you could have speculated. Could have been one person telling the story all over the world. You don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true, because I mean, I think it appears in the Sanskrit, in the Indian tradition, in Satapada Brahmana, which is probably, they date it around, I'd say 900 to 1200 BCE. Mm-hmm. But I think it appears in the Judaic tradition around like 1500 to 1800 BCE, and then it's probably 1800 around there during the time for the epic of
the point is, you got that parallelism.
Yeah. No, but I mean, so what it means for the Judaic tradition is different from what it means in the Indian tradition, right? Because is there similarities?
No, in this case, the meaning is very similar also.
Okay. So it was just later, then...
The details, the names of the children, Noah's children are almost the same.
That's true.
Which is even more... which even shows there's got to be something, but the point, be a righteous person. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, if think about even the Adam myth, the myth of the flood is similar. Now, what other similarities were you struck by that hit your grasp?
The way. The way the specific ritual concerns are very similar. The things like what counts as exceptions to the rule. In many ways, if I had to explain in a classroom, the fundamental similarity is both Jews and Hindus think like the anthropologist Mary Douglas, in terms of there are core ideas and there are things on periphery.
Yeah.
If you don't explain it the same way, that for both Jews and Hindus, mushrooms are not a vegetable. And therefore you could find groups to create all sorts of rules, not the same rules, but just because they don't fit into the taxonomy of vegetables.
Right. That's fascinating, because I mean, it's both are very rule-based traditions. I mean,
rule-based and very much as anthropology of the everyday life, of the cosmos you live in.
Right. And here's a couple other questions I would have is, how would the Jewish tradition view someone like, in Krishna, in the avatar sense? Like, how do they engage with that concept?
It's never engaged, and that's the interesting point. I would love to find some. It seems I haven't found any volume or anything from the community that lived in India.
Uh-huh.
And in the versions that came for Jews living in the West, they came through the Persian, in which Krishna was everything was translated as Deva, which is translated as angel.
Okay.
The Judeo-Arabic books, Persian books, all translated as angel.
Okay.
Meaning, Narayan, Brahman got translated as God.
Yeah.
Everything else got translated as angel. Which is it's an interesting form of translation.
Right.
It's the Christians translated as other gods and wanted to say it's forbidden.
Right. but you guys translate it as angel to give it,
which put it in this funny category of representations, divine. It's
but it treats it as legitimate, but maybe different.
right, or illegitimate because Jews don't do angels. Angels. You can't pray to them.
You can't pray to them, but they exist in the world, right?
They exist. You just don't pray to them.
Right.
So it says, oh, they've got angels also. It doesn't.
Interesting. So how did it would now that the two communities are interacting at a much deeper level? Has there been any work on how like the avatar concept is addressed, or even the concept of a murti is addressed?
So it's happening right now. There's a number of us putting out books right now, doing studies now. This is where it's at. We're talking about a reapproachment that is only about 13 years old.
Right. No, and that makes total sense. Because one of the things I would ask is, so like as a Hindu, I would feel comfortable going into a synagogue or a temple and worshiping there. Now the question would be: Is Judaism still trying to work that out? If they're comfortable going into like a mandir or even like yajna homa and feeling like
that. So that becomes the point where the lines, and I don't think anybody's worked that. They're still trying to get even what the data is.
Right.
Because you're not going to do it from a history book. You're going to do it through India, and you're going to do it from visiting how it's played out in America, in New Jersey, in Los Angeles, to get a real sense. So Jews will never use a murti, even a Jewish murti. It's just not done. That's the definition of Judaism.
Right.
Everything else is a very different, is a space to be worked out in the coming years.
Which is, it's an interesting time where you're having, two super ancient and continuing traditions. Really, first time they're kind of really interacting even though the Jewish people were in India at the same time, I don't know how much interaction happened. Do you have an understanding? So
from the Indian Jews I spoke to, Jews did not ever have anything to do with the temple.
Okay.
There. But they had no problem with anything that they saw as civil religion. So they had no problem with Diwali and Holi and all the public festival aspects.
As long as it did not require worshiping a particular deity or anything.
Right. So that was their resolution.
Okay. Now, did they, in any form to your knowledge, take these traditions or holidays that the Hindus had and kind of make it their own version?
Well, they made it more their own, as they still gave, for example, some of the biblical offerings as fruit offerings. It's the only Jewish community in the world that still gave fruit offerings.
But they didn't become vegetarian or any of that stuff.
They did become. There are Jewish communities that did. A lot of them became. They either became vegetarian or had special rules in which they now are very proud that how Passover rules are even stricter than the worst. Because the sign of pride of how much your rules can restrict you.
That's pretty funny. That's
so media had more to do with whether you were located within Muslim or Hindu nations type of things.
So I'm doing a quick look through what my notes were on your book. Sorry.
What did you learn the most about Judaism from it?
Well, a lot of this stuff about Kabbalah that I did not know, because the only, to be honest, outside of a few of the Platonist thinkers and Maimonides, I haven't, and actually Spinoza, but Spinoza has been my philosopher of everything, but he's not really a Jewish philosopher in the sense of he doesn't really write about Judaism, and that's more Maimonides. That's I spent a lot of time.
Yeah. So 2 points. One, I should tell you, one of my local physicians that I go to,
Yeah.
who's from the Indian background,
Yeah.
has in his picture of his little shrine in the waiting room, has a picture of Spinoza and Einstein added to his pantheon.
And the thing is, but you know that he's not worshiping like Einstein.
Right.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
So that's one. Two is at the current, I just came back from the American Academy of Religion. And we just had a panel on comparing Kabbalah and Hindu philosophies.
Yeah.
We're at it right now. I mean, this is the first panel ever done on the topic.
And who are your co-panelists with you?
What?
Who are your co-panelists with you?
So one, a professor of Hinduism. I don't want to, till things get published from the West Coast.
Okay. All right.
Who did a thing on from a Hindu point of view doing it. Another one was a non-Hindu professor of Hinduism who was doing it.
Okay.
So it's all in the same panel.
Interesting.
But that's where things are at right now, saying there's something profitably to be gained by doing this comparison.
Right. I think that's totally true. So what's your position on the insider versus outsider approach to religion, in the sense of, like, what you are primarily writing about understanding Hinduism via the Jewish lens, right? Which is your now. How about when a non-believer looks up into like Judaism or Hinduism, but only from like a critical perspective?
So I am less comfortable with that, and I find that less productive.
Okay. Yeah.
So while I did rely on some of the academic literature, I relied quite a bit on regular books written for Hindus by Hindu teachers and for the community.
Right.
Just a critical edge is not the most important contribution.
Sure.
And on the other hand, I'm self-conscious that I'm looking from a Jewish point of view, but I'm not claiming anything final about the Hindu point of view. I'm saying I'm looking for the Jewish point of view. I may be well-read, but I'm making no claims about what that means. I leave it to Hindu teachers, but from a Jewish point of view, this is what it looks like.
And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about your book. It came off very erudite, and it came off. The amount of Indian source texts you went to was ridiculous. It was. A lot of Indian scholars themselves, or even non-believing non-Hindu scholars themselves, don't do the kind of perspective you did, which is to steel man or take the argument or position of the Hindu as they say it, and not as you think that they mean it. And that I think was very important in trying to convey how Jews might approach the religion and vice versa.
So I'm very uncomfortable with some of the secular American academic approaches to Hinduism.
Yeah.
Because if they said the same things about Judaism, there would be a protest.
Yeah. No, and I think it's such a strong but I actually think the perspective you took on the book, which leaves a lot to think about. And I think a lot of times people want to give you a conclusion and be like, this is what it says, as opposed to saying, okay, here's how it appears, or here's what they think, or here's how they approach it. Now you can look into it with whatever lens you want to wear and make your conclusion, because we don't have an answer at this point. And I thought I really learned a lot in your book. Never once that I feel was judgmental or you're taking a position, even such a thing as that's idol worship in Judaism, such a anathema to the you approach it in such a, actually, to be honest, a very open and liberal way of thought that it was. I would have never guessed you would have been against it. I would, or maybe you're not. I don't know, but that it was wrong in the view, because it just appeared that you took it from a perspective of, here's what they do. We might not do it, but here's what we do, that kind of makes it kind of weird in between yes and no.
Yeah, I was a certain border crosser. I saw explaining it, trying to be sympathetic.
Yeah. So I I would recommend this book to Hindus. I mean, I know you write that in this book that it's meant for Jewish people that understand Hinduism,
Right.
but I actually think it cuts both ways. You learn so much about. I learned a lot, and I'm not even like, and I generally think I'm more well read than most people about like religious texts. I learned so much about the Jewish tradition in this book than a lot of other books I would read, and I think it's especially since the way you compare and discuss each other, and I think it's for anyone that was interested in interfaith interaction. But I think for Jewish people and Hindu people to read this book would be, amazing.
I will tell you that back in 14, 15, 16, I spoke on a whole bunch of college campuses in which I would get both Hindus and Jews showing up.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Hindus, I would get these questions like, they're saying they never thought about these things, and a lot of them were not brought up
Right.
They were not brought up to emphasize this because they had to finish their science degree type of
I totally
appreciated the lectures.
Because growing up, my dad, and this is one thing I really appreciate, is he would always say, and my dad is pretty ritualistic so we belong to the Vishishta Dvaita Sampradaya, right? So Ramanuja's Darshana, in Vedanta. Right. So he would always say, because being a first generation American in U.S., you interact with. Yeah.
We're both first generation.
Yeah. So I was first time, we interacted with Christians and Muslims and Jews and all these different groups of people with different religions. And my dad's, one of the first things he'd always tell me is, he'd be like, we're all worshiping the same God. That's just God appearing to them in their world, in their viewpoint. And that's just, how they conceive of God. We don't belong to different religions. It was just really interesting. And now it's simplistic to say we don't belong to different religions, but it's great to understand that we might have all the same God. In which I think I got from your book in a very, it's in a fantastic way.
Okay, thank you.
So just a few more questions to end off, and then anything else you want to talk about. So how, if someone were interested in, say becoming a Jew or following the Jewish traditions, you guys don't have a formal conversion process.
No, we have a formal, it's just the opposite. We have a very formal process.
Okay, I'm sorry.
because you're so much seen as either you're part of this Dharma or you're not. The first thing you're told is, stick to your own.
Yeah.
If you still want to do it, then here is how you have to study and become part of it.
So you can convert. Yeah. So and what does that require?
It requires usually 6 months to a year and a half of study.
Okay.
It requires a immersion in a ritual bath.
Okay.
Birth, and for men it requires circumcision.
Okay. Yeah, that might be tougher for later on in life.
That's right.
But it does not require like a belief.
It requires the general acceptance of the beliefs that go with the practice.
With the practice, so you can be like,
it's not a Christian I affirm.
Yeah.
Sort of thing is you it's like saying you affirm all the tenets of the Dharma. There's no.
Yeah, as long as you follow it, no one cares. It's. At least that's how I view the Indian situation or Hindu situation. Is that similar in
similar. They're going to give you, here's books on Jewish thought. Say you agree with it, fine, good. This is what we believe. They're going to focus more on whether you keep the Sabbath or not.
Okay.
That's the real point.
So do you have anything else that you think that I have not dealt with or discussed that you think that that you would love to bring out?
No, I think that we did a nice job of. I dealt with a lot of topics. I don't even know.
Yeah, you did. And you laid it out very well. I just because a lot of this is about intricacies, right? It's about like the intricacy of like things like even when you talk about the different darshanas about like Nyaya, Vaisheshika, all that stuff. It's difficult to talk about them without having a baseline
That's right.
engaging them. And so sometimes on these podcasts, it's better to talk overviews, and then I give them links to just to look up something, right? Like I mean, for example, like Nyaya is, like you said, just simple logic that is employed by Jewish, Christian, everyone. I mean, the rules are there. I mean, Vedanta would be closest to like a Maimonidic kind of.
It would be a mystical approach wherever you find it.
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, right? Because I mean, Vedanta has like the two streams of the mysticism, but it also has some sort of the pure logical arguments. Like, especially if you look at things like it depends on where you look at, right? If you read something like the Brahma Sutra Bhashas, it's a very logical kind of textual exegesis of the Upanishads and then like other texts. But if you look at someone like the Gita Bhashya that written by Shankara or Ramanuja or something, it's much more mystical in orientation.
That's right. They're more theological.
Yeah, exactly. So I think down the line it'd be great to have you. I would love to have like at some point maybe another interfaith kind of discussion where we can do more pointed topics.
Excellent.
If you have anything else that you think I should be aware of, do you have an email that people can reach out?
I have an email.
Okay. If you want to give it out, that's fine. If not, that's okay too.
That's fine. Okay, I'm going to say it twice and spell it. It's kavanah@gmail. Kavanah is the equivalent of Dhyana.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm KAVVANAH. So it's two V's, KAVVANAH @gmail.com.
Okay. And do you have a website?
I have a blog. I'm all over social media. Google me and you'll find me.
Okay. And what do you have coming out next that you want to plug or anything?
A whole bunch of things, but nothing I'm ready to plug.
Okay, excellent. Rabbi, thank you so much for your time. This is, I think, is a fantastic engagement for me to learn a lot from what you have written and the work you put into this text. And just talking to you, it's been amazing. Thank you for your.
You're welcome.
Time. Namaste, sir. Let me stop the recording.